I'm just glad to be a part of your morning. Hopefully I can kind of build on this morning and share some stuff with you that might help you, not just personally, but professionally. That DVD I show is really, has been my life philosophy for a long time. Those words, find a way, have helped me to live a dream and fight to live. They were resonated by people actually when I was a young boy. This whole thing started actually when I was about 12 years old. When you are young, and if you could back up just for a moment and you could think of the things you used to dream of becoming, the one thing I do love about children is they have no boundaries. What they think and their perspective is actually an amazing thing that for some reason it deteriorates as we grow older. And the story I'm going to share with you will probably explain why. The first time I ever saw football on TV, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to play in the National Football League. So I immediately would announce and tell people I was going to play in the NFL. Every time I would say that, I'd hear one of four things. Oh, Merril, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Or Merril, do you know how hard that's going to be? Or Merril, do you know what the odds of you playing in the National Football League are? Or it's impossible. Now, when I was 12 years old, a very historic moment was happening for me. I was getting my own room. I'd shared a room with my younger brother, Marty, forever. And I was getting my own room. And in this room, I cared about one thing. I wanted a wall made of cork. I didn't care if I had a bed. I didn't care if I had carpet. I wanted a wall of cork. Now, my dad was doing the room, and when I asked him about that, he's like, oh, yeah, I'll get you a cork board. I said, no, I want a wall of cork. He's like, well, why would you want a wall of cork? I said, it was very simple. My vision of my bedroom, when I walked in it, is I was going to have my goals pinned up. And those goals that were going to be pinned up, I was going to have visuals. I was going to have pictures of players, of things I wanted to accomplish. The reason for that is because every day I started in my bedroom, and every day I finished there. And I wanted to have an inventory of what it was, I was going to accomplish, and had I done something that day to get there. So my room completes, my dad understands what I want, and I get there, my bed is actually bumped up against that cork wall. He actually makes a cork wall that's really only half the wall. This goes from about the bed up, but nonetheless, it was enough for me. Now, in anticipation of that room being done, I put together my goals. I got these 8x10 cards, and I wrote, you can imagine what the first one was, I will play in the NFL. As I got on top of my bed and I was putting that goal up, I just couldn't help but revisit all the things that had been said to me, how hard it was going to be, the odds. Now, at that time, I did not realize this or did not know it, but 0.01% of high school kids ever play in the National Football League. Odds were against me. It was going to be hard. But I thought, there's nothing wrong with life with having more than one basket. And I knew this, it wasn't impossible. So I started thinking, I was like, well, you know what, I'm going to find a way. Whatever work is required, I will do it, and I will beat the odds. And I remember immediately, even though I was very young, and I didn't really understand the magnitude of it, I felt my energy change. When I said, well, let me find a way to beat the odds and whatever work's required, I felt me change. And I'm like, well, that's it. So I got down, I had extra 8x10 cards, and I wrote, find a way. And I put that on the top of my wall. Now, it would stay there for the next 9 years in that bedroom, and every goal would fall under it. But what those words did for me that day is it inspired action. It expanded my boundaries. And when I think about that moment at that time, instead of thinking and focusing and having my energy on things that were negative and I was worried might happen, I took them all towards what I wanted to have happen. And that is where the journey actually begins. I immediately started thinking, well, if I'm going to do this, I got to find out how to do it. And what better way than people that are already playing in the National Football League? At the time, my favorite player was Walter Payton. I idolized him. I thought he was the best football player to ever put on a pair of pads. So I went to the library to find out more about Payton. I wanted to discover articles or something that gave me some insight of what makes him great. What does he do? Now, how I stumbled across this probably speaks to my intelligence of the library. but I stumble across a quote by Aristotle. And I read this quote by Aristotle, and whether it was an accident or by divine intervention, it was very simple. We are what we repeatedly do. Then excellence is not an act, but a habit. Thank goodness I read that. Rather, it was by accident or other. But it said everything that I needed to be. And if you think about those words, we are what we repeatedly do. Then excellence is not an act, but a habit. I had to be excellent. It was going to require excellence for me to achieve my goal. And I was willing to accept that. But that quote right there would really become a foundation and a staple for my journey. Now, I eventually did discover some things on Walter Payton. Things that will resonate with me, stay with me today, and were very powerful. I heard about this DVD or VHS he was putting out. I always have to correct myself on that because I'm with the times now. You know, nobody has a VHS anymore. Back then it was a VHS. But I wanted this VHS because he was going to tell about all the things that he does as a football player, all his charity work, and it was going to be a private look at his life. So I got that tape. When I played that tape, I would discover one of his magical gifts, or the key or the thing that makes him special, because he was asked that in the interview process. He was asked, what makes you better than everybody else? Now, this is coming out shortly after he's become the all-time leading rusher. And he said something very profound. He said, that's very simple. He says, I want it more than they do every day of the week. He goes, you just see Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, when I train, I want it more than they do. When I practice, I want it more than they do. Why stop for a moment? And I thought, he didn't talk about being bigger, stronger, or faster. I understand that's all part of it. He was talking about a mindset and an approach that he's had for as long as he can remember. It was the thing that separated him from the other people, other great players, mind you. My immediate thought, I can do that. That is a choice. That is a mindset, and that is approach. And I took that Aristotle goal, that Aristotle quote, and the Walter Payton mindset, and I applied them as a young boy. I believed that it was probably one of the key ingredients to help me, not through high school and college, but to eventually be drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And before I move on, though, just to maybe make you understand that this was not some lip service because he was putting out a tape of himself, which one might think, of course you're going to say something great about yourself because you're selling these tapes. I am going to fast forward some 15 years later. I am playing for the Chicago Bears. I am sitting on the same table that Walter Payton used to sit on before he would get ready for practice. I was getting taped by the same trainer that used to tape Walter Payton. And what I loved about that was Fred Cato would always tape me, and I would get a Walter Payton story. Before every practice, I'd get on the table and say, Fred, I want another Walter Payton story. And every day, Fred would tell me something different about Walter Payton, some of it funny, some of it interesting, but I always wanted a story. Well, on this particular day, I sat on the training table. A teammate of mine said, all right, I'm done with the stories. I'll tell you a story. I was just like you, Merril. Loved Walter Payton, wanted to be like Walter Payton. When I was drafted by the Chicago Bears, I wanted to train with Walter Payton. And when I met him, I asked, can we get together and can I train with you one time? And he said, absolutely. And he said, we set up a time and a date. And he goes, I couldn't sleep the night before. I was so excited to be able to train. And I'm thinking at that time, like, oh my gosh, wouldn't that have been an amazing thing to be able to train with Walter Payton and work with him? And that would have been fascinating. He's like, so we went, we set the time and the date. I got there, and I was early, because I was waiting for him. He pulls up in a red Ferrari, gets out, he's got sweats on, Rouge headband, Rouge sweatbands. He goes, he got out of his car, he goes, he just looks sweet. Now, his nickname was Sweetness, but he goes, look sweet. Because I was so excited, we talked a little bit, we stretched, we warmed up, and we went to that famous dirt hill that he would run. It's about 35% grade, 80 yards in length. Have you ever walked up a 5 to 10% grade hill for 80 yards? That could be somewhat significant. Now, they would run up it. Now, what they would do is they would run to the top, and their rest period would be as they walked down. Well, Maurice Douglas, this teammate of mine, was so excited about this. He said, we ran to the top of that hill. He goes, I got the top of the hill. He goes, I could literally see my chest, my heart coming out of my chest. I was hyperventilating. He goes, now reality has set in. And I have failed to ask the most important question. He goes, how many are we running? And Mo got the answer he was not hoping for. Walter turned to him. He said, he wasn't even breathing. He said, 10. He said, we walked to the bottom. We stopped. We turned around to head back up. He goes, I got halfway there, stopped, walked, puked, got in my car, and went home. But he then said something as profound, and I swear to you, I probably would have died on that hill, but I surely would never have said this, and I always admired his honesty at this. He said, you know what? The bottom line is, that dude just wants it more than I do. Walter Payton, 5'10", 205 pounds. Maybe the greatest player to ever put on a pair of pads. Maurice Douglas, 5'10", 205 pounds. A very good player. What did make the difference in those two players? Was it their ultimate skill set? Absolutely not. It was a mindset and a habit and an approach that the greatest player that ever put a pair of pads on had. And he carried that. And if you were willing to accept it, he'd share it with you. And I was grateful in an indirect way he shared that so it could help me achieve my goal to live a dream. Now, I was drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I believe I had it all in line. I knew everything. I was set to attack the National Football League. But I would learn another valuable lesson by one of the greatest teachers and leaders the NFL has ever seen. We were at the end of practice on a Friday, and at the end of practice is a culmination of the entire week. We call it team. This is where you put all your little wrinkles together, make sure you have things ironed out, so that on Sunday, there is no mistakes. Well, in this particular play, our quarterback got in the huddle. He called a pass play. My job is going to be very simple. I'm going to block an outside linebacker if he rushes. If he does not rush, I'm going to run a flat route. Quarterback takes the ball, snap, drops back, and throws the ball to the other side of the field. My linebacker drops, I run a flat route. As the ball travels to the other side of the field, the wide receiver catches it, he starts to run. Chuck Noll blows the whistle. Merril, what are you doing? Well, I immediately realized one thing. Although I hadn't been there long, I'd been there long enough to know this. Chuck Noll has never, ever stopped a play in the middle of it, asked somebody what they're doing, if they're doing something right. So my immediate fear was, oh my gosh, that linebacker probably blitzed, and I'm dead, because there's nothing worse than that. But he was in coverage. I was standing over there. I'd run the right route. I knew I ran the right route. But then I was doing nothing. Now, trust me, I didn't have this. This thought process didn't take this long. All of this happened within seconds. But I said nothing. He said, that's the problem. He said, I did not keep you on this football team to be a common football player. I can get anybody out of the stands to check an outside linebacker and run a flat route and do nothing. What I need you to do is be uncommon. And what I need you to do is when your buddy over there has the ball, I need you to show up to him. How do you know he's not going to fumble? Better yet, how do you know he doesn't break a tackle and you make a key block and we score? I can't have uncommon players on my team. Now, he went into a dissertation about the difference of being common and uncommon. I will never forget. I was humiliated at that point. As we finished practice and I headed back to the locker room, ironically, my locker was Franco Harris's old locker. As I walked there, it struck me. How many of you here have heard of the Immaculate Reception by a show of hands? Majority, but just for a quick Cliff Note version, it's one of the greatest plays in playoff history or NFL history. The Raiders were ahead by, I want to say, 3 points. The Steelers only had a few seconds left in the game, and Terry Bradshaw makes a pass down the middle of the field to Frenchie Fuqua. The ball hits Fuqua or Tatum, still today, we never know. But Franco Harris, the description is, plucks it out of thin air and runs for a touchdown. What's interesting about that play, which I firmly believe would never have happened if he had played for any other coach, Franco Harris was being an uncommon player at that time. That was not his job. His job on that play was to stay in and protect so Terry Bradshaw had time to throw the pass. But the second that ball left, he became an uncommon player, and he was going to the ball. I believe the Immaculate Reception would have never happened had he not been taught and led by Chuck Knoll, who's one of the most phenomenal teachers and leaders of our time or any time hence there. Now, I took that lesson and realized he didn't talk about being bigger, stronger, or faster. He talked about another mindset and habit and effort that I can do. I can apply in my arsenal, and I did. And I believe that was the thing that put me from playing in certain packages to a starter in the National Football League. Now, these things just become you. These habits are a part of what you do, to the point you don't even recognize them. Case in point, some 8 years later, I am playing for the Chicago Bears. We're at the end of training camp. The end of training camp, or the last day of training camp, or the last practice of that last day, we always condition. And our conditioning drill can be a variety of things. But on this day, we were going to run a series of 40-yard sprints. And it is very simple. You run 40 yards as fast as you can run it. And you have a 35-second rest. That is all that is required. Well, about halfway through this particular conditioning drill, our coach stops the drill. A rookie that we had drafted and brought in, he asks him, "How fast do you run the 40, Robbie?" And Robbie goes, "Whoa, Coach, I run a 4.240. Now, I'm going to just tell you this. You can run a 4.240 and be as dumb as a box of rocks, and you got a shot. Because that is rare, rare speed. And they will find ways for you to make a football team based on speed alone. Robbie, you sure you run a 4.240? Well, Coach, you're at my pro day. Of course, yeah. Really? Merril, how fast you run the 40? I'm like, okay, wise guy. I see what you're doing. Young guy, 4.2, old guy, you know doesn't run a 4.2. And I didn't respond to him. I thought it was humiliating that he would even ask that, and I didn't know. My thought process is, where is he going with this? To show that, one guy's faster than the other. That's why we're going to try to get rid of you. He goes, well, how many times? He goes, don't you have the longest playing streak in the NFL? And I had that before Brett Favre, although he shattered mine. But at the time I did, it was about 120 games. He's like, well, have you ever missed a game? And I was like, no. He goes, didn't you lead the team in rushing, your Steelers in rushing last year? Now he started to make me feel a little better. Started getting in my wheelhouse. So I started to communicate with him a little more. He goes, okay, tell me something. What's the fastest you ever ran a 40? All right, well, I feel better about that one because I could give him a 4, 5, 6 times that I ran for the Green Bay Packers. Honestly, at the end of the day, I was a 4.7 guy. I'll just be honest with you. But because I ran that 4, 5, 6, I can use it to the end of this day, and I ran it for the Green Bay Packers. So I can use that, but I'm being honest with you. He said a 4, 5, 6, and just so you know, a 4, 5, 6 and a 4.2, completely different beasts. Ron will tell you that is just a big difference. Well, then he turns to Robbie. He says, Robbie, can you explain something to me? Every time we do this conditioning drill or any other just like it, how come he beats you? Well, I will tell you this. For that flash of a moment, I went back to that bed when I was 12 years old, and I put that sign up, Find a Way. I wanted it more than Robbie every second, not just when we were going to play on Sunday. When we conditioned, I wanted it more than he did. When I trained, I wanted it more than he did. And those coaches knew it. That's why he then said, when we cut you next week, I just want you to know why. I have never forgot that. And it was about a mindset. And it was about expanding my boundaries and not accepting too hard, odds are against you, impossible, and don't put all your eggs in one basket. Now, within that journey, I had a lot of people help me find my way. It surely was not on my own. Walter Payton, Chuck Knoll, Aristotle, vital in that. And there are lessons inside the white lines of a football field. On February 14th, 2003, I would field a call from my doctor confirming I had a 3-pound tumor in my lower back. 6 months of brutal chemotherapy were next. Shaved my head because I was going to be bald. I was going to be sick. And maybe the most devastating words that doctor finished with was, I can't guarantee you it will work. Now, I can tell you this. After hearing that, my boundaries were extremely narrow. I had 2 things that I focused on at that time: chemotherapy and dying. Now, as I started to absorb that and digest that, there was one thing that I had to do immediately, and one thing I love more than anything in the NFL, more than anything in this world, more than playing in the National Football League, more than working at ESPN today. I love being a dad. It has been the greatest joys of my life, and the thing about it is it continues forever. But within being a dad and chains I wanted to break and pass on to my children, the one thing that has been vital in our relationship is a communication. We talk, I love them, I hug them, we communicate on all subjects. It has been very critical that I do that from day one, putting in a lot of investment, hoping to get the return as they get older, which has happened. But being able to talk to them and share with them has been very important to me. Now, when I know I'm going to be bald in 17 days, there's going to be a lot of significant changes going on in our home, and I want my kids to know about it. I wanted them to know about it now. And in an elementary way, I brought them together, my daughter, Corey, who was 9 at the time, and my son, Bo, who was 7. I gathered them up, and I explained to them the changes that were going to be taking place. I even used the word cancer, even though they didn't quite understand that. But I wanted them to understand that I was going to be bald in 17 days. As the doctor told me, I was probably going to be sick and laying around, not being able to do the things that I was accustomed to doing. Now, as I finished telling my kids that, there was that moment where all I could think again about was chemotherapy and dying. And in that thought process, my daughter, who was 9 at the time, had walked across the room, and she lifted my head up, and she sat in my lap, and she said, "Well, Dad, I want you to find a way." I'd been using that as a parenting tool for my kids. Not in a million years did I think I would ever be inspired more by a 9-year-old than that moment. Because I will tell you this, dying and chemotherapy were not an option. And my boundaries were not stuck there, nor was my energy. My energy changed. Being sick was not an option. Dying was not an option. Going bald was still going to be an option. But my energy changed when I was challenged in that manner. My whole focus and thought process changed. The same energy I was using, thinking about all these awful things that were going to happen to me, I took it and thought about things I wanted to have happen, I was going to make happen. I was going to live, I was going to train, I was still going to do the same things that I would normally do as a dad, I was just going to do it bald. And that was my focus. Now, I took all of those lessons off a football field and I did apply them. I wanted it more than anybody else. I was going to have to be uncommon. But one thing that I did do, I tried to discover all of the people that had experienced what I was about to experience. I talked to 5 people. None of those stories were very exciting. They were all gruesome. The one thing that resonated with me with all of these 5 people that I was able to talk to, there was one thing in common with all of them. They were still alive. As brutal as it was, they had made it. That gave me hope. Now, I had a plan when I walked into that chemotherapy room. I was still going to go play basketball right afterwards. I was going to still train the next day. And for 6 months, I was able to do that. My first treatment, though, would really give me an indication of what I was up against, that they failed to explain to you in great detail because there's so much information to be given. But in my process of treatment, it was about 8 to 9 hours. There was one portion of the treatment that is probably most critical and vital and explains how brutal it is. My nurse, Becky, who had those soft pajama-like outfits on the entire day, but this moment, comes walking in the room with what looked like a hazmat suit on. And she carried this syringe with this red liquid stuff in it, which I'll not even give you the medical name because it's so long. They even have a nickname for it, but it's called Red Death. And as they push it into your system, you can literally feel it screaming through your veins, through your head, through your tongue, through your cheeks, and it races through your body. In the process of that, I had consumed so many fluids at that point, I needed to go to the bathroom. And I asked Becky, well, listen, after we're done here, do you mind if I go to the bathroom? She said, yes, but I want to caution you that what I've just put in you is at 100% potency. You're going to have red urine when you go to the bathroom, and it's going to come out at an 80% potency. And I'd like you to flush twice because if it splashes up on the porcelain, it'll eat it. Exactly. That's what I was up against. But I can tell you this, when my treatment was over, I went to my basketball game. When I got up the next morning, I trained just as I would normally train. And what that did for me was I would turn almost a gallon and a half of water in a 24-hour period. Because chemotherapy is not an antibiotic. Chemotherapy works within seconds. The problem is it stays within your system, and it's a matter of you flushing it. So with basketball and training, I was able to flush and cleanse my system a lot faster than had I not done that. And it did help me recover. I believe it was the one thing, or one of the real important things, that was helpful and vital for me to get through that period of time, along with a mindset created from Walter Payton and Chuck Noll and Aristotle and the challenge that my daughter gave me. And I try to caution people all the time, keep your head on a swivel. You never know where inspiration will come from. It can come from people who have won Super Bowls, or it can come from a 9-year-old girl. Inspiration has been vital in my life with all the things that I have done. Now, for 6 months, I will go through this entire battle. I wanted it more than anybody else. I was uncommon in that approach. And I had habits that I established and structured that allowed me to get through it. All those things that I learned from a football field that transferred to the game of life. And one thing I have learned through all of this, because I had already predisposed myself to failure if I ever had cancer, because prior to my diagnosis, I had read this story of this young lady who had went through a very brutal chemotherapy battle, but she had won it. And the story was very gruesome and powerful and inspirational, but I remember thinking, boy, I could never do that. But I don't have to worry. Based on my genetics and our family history, we have never had any cancer whatsoever. I will never have to worry about that. I'd already predisposed myself to failing and succumbing to something that devastating. That's why I believe no matter what direction you are on, personally or professionally, if you don't like it, you have the ability to change it. I hope that you will realize your enormous gifts that you have. Regardless in this room, all of the different skill sets that we have, the different loves and passions, there's a few things that are universal in this room. Your spiritual and your mental strength, they are endless. And if they are utilized and tapped, they can do wonderful things for you, personally or professionally. And you have that ability. You have that ability to apply it and to use it as you find your way personally and professionally. Thank you.